Now, let's be clear. Everybody sitting in this part of the auditorium before the barrier and back must be a town meeting member and must have a card. Is there anybody sitting there who does not have a card and who is not a town meeting member? If so, then you have to go back beyond the barrier. This is representative town meeting. Okay, before I start, on this side, I'm going to have as my counters Roger Bellumer and Jeff Mitchell. In the middle, I'm going to have Paul Koski and Lynn Bergeron. And over here, I'm going to have Charles Olson and Bob Horoyan. Would you all come down now so you may be sworn in, please? Bob Horoyan. Thank you, gentlemen. I wish it hadn't been. I want to get more women to count. Okay, could we please stand for the pledge? Okay, I'm going to ask, please, that everybody shut off their cell phones. No phone calls, no tweeting. This is a serious meeting. Now, this is not a continuation of the Board of Selectmen's hearings. This is the Auburn Town Meeting, the Auburn Representative Town Meeting. And I'd like to suggest that town meeting members limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes. And I guess I'd say, too, if somebody says what you were going to say, it's perfectly fine when you get up to just say, I sure agree with that. Thank you. To hear Article 1, to hear the report of the Finance Committee, other town offices and committees, or act on anything relative thereto. The Finance Committee, Ms. Kavanaugh.
And is subject to a purchase and sales agreement between the Post family and a developer signed in August 2014, with the town of Auburn contemplating a right of first refusal to purchase the land for $2.865 million. Regarding Article 2, if the Board of Selectmen and the town meeting are in favor of purchasing this property, then the Finance Committee recommends an authorization to borrow $2.865 million by implementing the town CFO's strategy of using a combination of bands and 10-year bonds to finance 100% of the net purchase price of the land. The Finance Committee opinion is that this financing strategy leverages the already existing strong bond rating of the town and takes advantage of historically low borrowing rates. And the committee also feels that using stabilization funds or free cash to support this purchase would place an unnecessary and negative risk on our bond rating, as would explicitly run counter to the town of Auburn's own current financial guidelines. Bear in mind our upcoming debt obligations. The town share of the Auburn Middle School project is $23.7 million, of which $13.7 million was bonded in September 2014, and the remaining balance of $10 million will be bonded in September 2015. Also keep in mind, as a town, we should recognize that tonight's scenario might well repeat itself. The town might again have the first right of refusal to purchase Chapter 61A protected land. We need to keep this in mind as we move forward into the next fiscal years. Respectfully submitted, Ann Kavanaugh, Vice Chair, Finance Committee, Kevin Hussey, Chairman, James Bonifilio, Kimberly Holstrom, Edward Coleman, Christopher Haroyan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kavanaugh. Are there any other committees planning to say anything? Okay, but just before the board starts, just a couple of things. This meeting, of course, is being televised. The other thing is, I don't know whether you all realize this or not, we basically up here can't see you because we've got the lights in our eyes, and a lot of times we can't hear you because the microphones shoot out toward the audience rather than us. So, now, yes.
Thank you,
Go
Mr. Moderator. Good evening, town meeting members and residents in attendance. First, under Article 1, reports. The Board of Selectmen at its last meeting voted to support asking town meeting to authorize the funding to purchase the land. That was a 4-to-1 vote, with Mr. Carpenter abstaining from the vote. At our meeting just prior to this town meeting, Mr. Carpenter has had the opportunity to walk the land, get further information, and although he's not able to be part of the vote, he can put on the record, the public record, that he is in support of the borrowing, authorization of the borrowing of the funding to purchase the land. Having said that, the Article 2, the Board of Selectmen did sponsor, and at our meeting prior to this, the board voted to authorize the borrowing in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 7, in accordance with the recommendation by our CFO. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Article 2. To see if the town meeting will appropriate a sum of money, by borrowing or otherwise, to purchase a certain parcel of land containing approximately 50 acres and currently classified and taxed as agricultural land pursuant to NGLC Chapter 61A. The land is commonly known as South Meadow Farm and located along Southold Road, also known as Southold Road Extension and Southold Meadow Road in Auburn, Massachusetts, and is owned by the Sylvia C. Post Family Limited Partnership 1 and Sylvia C. Post Limited Partnership 4, or act on anything relative thereto. Mr. Kosky.
Paul Kosky, Precinct 1, 18 Jade Hill Road. Article 2, I move that the town meeting vote to authorize by borrowing, in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 7, Paragraph 3, $2,865,000 to purchase a certain parcel of land containing approximately 50 acres and currently classified and taxed as agricultural land pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 61A. The land is commonly known as South Meadow Farm and located along Southold Road, also known as Southold Road Extension and Southold Meadow Road in Auburn, Massachusetts, and is owned by Sylvia C. Post Family Limited Partnership 1 and Sylvia C. Post Limited Partnership 4. To meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow said amount under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, or pursuant to any other enabling authority.
Is there a second? There is a second. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Seeing none, we will take the vote. What? All right. Mr. Simone.
Steve Simone, Board of Selectmen. I don't support the option of borrowing. We've had several discussions, many of you have been there. And the bottom line is this. We know for a fact that if we borrow this money, there will be a tax increase to the residents of Auburn. Now, there's speculation on if the money is appropriated from stabilization and free cash. There may be some issues with that. There's a risk either way. But there's no guarantee that your taxes will go up. If we borrow the money, they definitely will. Here's another problem I have with this. A week ago, this board supported not moving on the tax classification because the sole reason was they didn't want to raise the taxes on the residents of Auburn. I completely understand that part of it. What I can't wrap my head around is we're sitting here a week later and they're advocating for exactly the opposite thing, recommending to put this motion before you to borrow money to raise your taxes. It doesn't make sense to me. You can't have it both ways. We do not know for a fact that the bond rating will go down. Mr. Kazanovich has said so, and the rest of it is all speculation. But I can guarantee you this, if you vote to borrow this money, your taxes are going up.
Are there any other comments? Question? Yes, sir.
Phil Joinville, Precinct 4. I just have a couple of questions generally to the people in front of me. Has the town authorized the CMA for the property? Because I'm just wondering if $2.8 million is an appropriate amount of money to spend on the land. If it's agricultural, are we talking about $2.8 million as developable land or as agricultural land? And I'd also like to know,
Excuse me, before.
I'm sorry.
What's a CMA?
a comparative market analysis.
Comparative market analysis?
So for like properties, if
Okay.
you were to sell your house,
Okay,
you
I
need to
just
know
think
how to-
everybody should
how
know
to
what it
price your
is.
house. I apologize.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to know why the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board have not been included in any of these discussions, because they're going to have to make some decisions also. And it is going to be after the fact that we've already spent $2.8 million.
All right. Yes, Ms. Jacobson.
Town meeting members, to answer a couple of the questions, first regarding a CMA. Under the Chapter 61A, Section 14 process under Mass General Law, the town has the option to exercise or waive or assign its right of first refusal on the 61A property for the purchase price that's listed in the purchase and sales agreement. So rather than having a market analysis, because the market, a true going out and getting assessed, an appraisal, the town is required to pay that amount. However, based on the assessor's information, the parcels of land under question are valued at approximately, from an assessment point of view, it would be $317,000 if it was just used as open space, approximately $1.85 million if it was used as residential. Again, that was based on assessors for the use of the land. Projected in the future, what would that use be? Regarding, what was the
Conservation plan.
Thank you. Under Chapter 61A, Section 14, the seller is required to notify the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, the assessor. So they have been notified, and I don't want to speak for them, but I can tell you, because the chairman of the Conservation Commission did contact me and let me know that the Conservation Commission on November 12th voted unanimously to recommend to the board that they purchase the land. The Planning Board did not take an official vote. Again, I don't want to speak for them. They had a number of discussions, but I don't want to speak for them. But I can tell you that the Conservation Commission chair did notify me that they voted unanimously to purchase the land.
Thank you. Is this price negotiable?
Through the chair, the price is not negotiable. Town's right of first refusal has to be based on the purchase price that is actually in the purchase and sales agreement.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kosky from the Planning Board.
Paul Kosky, Chairman of the Planning Board. In September, the Planning Board was presented with this proposal. The proposal that came before the Planning Board at that time was 38 individual house lots, which the Planning Board had already approved. It had gone through Conservation, it had gone through the ZBA, it had gone through the Planning Board, it had gone through the town engineers, it had been approved by peer review. So what we were looking at that time was 38 house lots. It was not a 40B. So when we took a vote, we said 38 house lots, absolutely, let them build it. But with a 40B, it would have been an entirely different matter. So we never got to vote on the 40B. And the other thing is that when we built the high school, because of our ability to borrow, we've saved 1.5 million, was it, Mr. Kasanovich? And didn't we, right after we did that, we raided the stability fund and free cash, and had we borrowed at the rate that we had to get after we raided free cash and borrowing, we'd have paid $600,000 more just in interest on that, I think, something like that. I gave Mr. Kasanovich a hat, and he pulls rabbits out of it all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. Yes, Mr. Wojciech?
Daniel Largis, Precinct 4. At what point is the free cash capped? When, in your opinion, will we be able to touch that money? Is it going to be 10 million, 12 million, 15 million? At what point can we take that money and use it for something? In the meeting an hour ago, you said it was going to affect, in your opinion, it was going to affect the bond rating.
Mr. Largess, as I indicated to you at the Board of Selectmen's meeting tonight, that we have to maintain a level of reserves in order to get a bond upgrade. I can tell you, and I told town meeting at the annual town meeting as well as the fall town meeting, we currently have a positive outlook in place assigned by Moody's Investors Service that was issued to the town of Auburn at our last rating in September of 14, roughly 2 months ago. That positive outlook is an indication that we are going to be considered for an upgrade within the next 2 years. Moody's is required to act on that positive outlook within a 2-year period. They're required to, but they can pull it away from the town of Auburn at any given time. I would urge town meeting members not to utilize any portion of our reserves because it could put at risk that positive outlook. That positive outlook would result in a bond rating upgrade from a AA3 to a AA2. What does that mean? That means for any bond issues, any money that we borrow for our capital needs, whether it be for the middle school or for our annual capital, can be borrowed at a lower interest rate and save the taxpayers of this community money. So that results in long-term savings. In terms of our reserves, and I would suggest all town meeting members to go online and look at our financial policies. Our financial policies are set in place. It was a roadmap. It was adopted in the fall of 2012 by the Board of Selectmen, by the Finance Committee, and presented to town meeting. It's a course of action that we stayed with in an attempt to improve our financial stability in the long term and to ultimately get a bond rating upgrade. That's our goal. That's our intent. I am telling you that a utilization of our reserves could put at risk our attempt to get a bond rating upgrade. It's also in conflict with our current financial policies. Policies that were presented to this town meeting, also policies that were adopted by a unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. So until such time, we are not proposing to spend down our reserves or utilize our reserves in any way. I can tell you, when we do get our bond rating upgrade and we do hit our benchmarks, we have no problem appropriating free cash, and it's in the financial policies, as well as stabilization for one-time capital or one-time appropriation needs, whether it be for land or any other purpose. To utilize free cash or stabilization to offset any portion of our operating budget comes with a consequence. Moody's or any other bond rating agency does not want to see free cash or stabilization used as an operational revenue source to be used on an annual basis. So I hope that answers your question.
No, my question is, at what time will we be able to touch that? You're saying 6-point-something million, we can't touch it. At what point? Will it be 8 million? Will it be 10 million? Will it be 12 million? Where is the cap where we'll be able to take money from that and use that? without affecting the town.
I could tell you that there are three sources of funds that really come into play. Excess levy, we have $3.3 million. Available for appropriation, it would not hamper our bond rating. I'm going to tell you, free cash and stabilization would come with consequences if used. At what point can we use that? I can tell you that the level of reserve combined, we are currently at 13% of our general fund operating expenditures. Moody's and other rating agencies would like to see that level of reserve in the vicinity of 19 to 20%. So I could tell you combined, we would like to get to that percentage before we would consider utilization of those reserves.
How long will it take us to get to that?
Oh, I don't know.
I can't tell you, because it all depends on a number of things that come into play. Free cash is not appropriated by town meeting. Free cash is calculated based upon what revenue the community receives during the year, what level of expenditures are made during the course of that year, then netted out against one another, and that balance is closed out against free cash. There are years when free cash was reduced, our undesignated fund balance and our free cash was reduced because expenditures exceeded revenue. I can tell you right now, the state is looking at a $325 million revenue deficit. They're talking about cuts that may come to each and every community. What share of that is going to impact Auburn? We don't know. We already set our budget. That could create a hole. That could reduce our free cash position going into next year. Free cash is certified by the Department of Revenue on an annual basis based upon our closeout every fiscal year. Our free cash certified by DOR was made by the Department of Revenue on October 10th of this year. So they look at the financial position of a community as it closes its books for June 30th of every year. Historically, we don't do that until September. We have to close out our all of our invoicing, all of our bills, all of our payroll, as well as record all of our revenue. So I can't give you a free cash would have to be $10 million. I can give you a level of reserve that is a standard or a statistical component of how our community is rating. Right now, that level would be in the vicinity of about 19%.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cousinovich. Yes.
Hi, Jeff McElroy, Precinct 4. I have a question and a comment and then a question. My comment is that with regards to tax increases, I expect the alternative, which is that we allow a developer to come in and build this apartment complex that I hear about, and allowing for all sorts of low-income housing to come into Auburn. I imagine that we'll be paying for it in other ways. My question is this: the $1 million, I've heard that there's $1 million that has apparently been offered to the town of Auburn to pay for this, so with the stipulation that it would only be that the land could not be built upon.
Those letters have to be passive use. That is correct.
Is that part of what we're voting on? Obviously, it's not in the bill saying that we would use it, but is that still part of what could be determined for the, as part of what we're voting on?
We're voting on 2.85 or 6, which was it there, okay? And it will then be up to the Board of Selectmen when we've now appropriated the money for them, and then they, at their meeting, could determine whether they wish to use the $1 million gift, the anonymous gift, as part of what they're going to do, and only borrow the rest.
And could it be possible for us to hear just at least the take of the person who's in charge of the Board of Selectmen? I forget the chairman, is it? Is it possible to hear her take on it?
I'm sorry?
Is it possible to hear a take or the opinion of the Board of Selectmen in general about what that?
What they want to do?
Yeah.
Well, it's up to the board. Doreen? Ms. Goodrich?
We act as a body, and the Board of Selectmen has not taken a position on the $1 million. We expected that there would be discussion on town meeting floor as to whether town meeting supported accepting the gift.
Yes. No, Mr. Platukas.
Greg Bowling, Precinct 4. Given that the Board of Selectmen is looking for town meeting input on the $1 million donation, I just would like to make a comment on that. I have some reservations about the stipulations that are attached to that $1 million donation. It sounds to me like it would prevent things such as improving Southold Road, creating a gravel parking lot so that Cub Scouts could go traipse around in a wilderness park. So I think the board should look long and hard about what those restrictions really are, what the town would be allowed to do or not before considering taking that. I've seen the presentation on what borrowing the entire $2.865 million would do. It's less than $40 a year over the 10 years. I've not had a single person come to me and say, that's unacceptable to me. I've not had a single person come to me and say, don't buy the land. So, you know, from the people that have talked to me that I'm representing here, most of them, you know, in my opinion and what they've given to me, would accept borrowing the 2.865 over a 10-year and just giving the town some options in terms of what to use that land for. And the decision would not have to be made immediately. So, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Platukas?
Bob Platukas, 231 Melbury Street. I am in favor of buying the land. I am in favor also in not accepting the $1 million and keeping the land so that we have the use of the land for whatever the town needs, whether it's town wells or other types of needs. But my question is, if this was agricultural land, I believe the owner has to pay taxes on the difference from if it hadn't been used as agricultural land. If that's true, how much is that? And is that going to be used to defer the cost of the land?
Okay, I'm gonna go for, yes, Julia Rand. Has everybody got the question now? When the land is sold and is no longer agricultural land, what will the tax liability be for the person who owned the land? Is that correct, Mr. Platukas?
Yes, I want to know how much is it, and what is that money going to be used for?
Okay, good question. Because the use has been changed as a result of the notification, and if the board should exercise its option to purchase, there is what they call a rollback tax. The rollback tax goes back to a 5-year period and recalculates the tax based upon the change of use. That tax is estimated to be about $90,000. DOR requires that's treated as basically a commitment to collect the rollback tax. That tax has to be recorded as general fund revenue and cannot be set aside for a down payment on the purchase of the land. It's a receivable to the town of Auburn.
So it can't be used to help, well,
I think
in the general fund.
The question is, it could go back to town meeting. If this was known before the tax rate is set, if there was a known commitment for the 90, so now the town of Auburn knows it's going to get an additional $90,000, it could have appropriated $90,000 into a line item for the purchase of land. But it is a general fund revenue. Once the tax rate is set, you're not allowed to raise through general funds or taxation, only through available funds. So the town would lose the ability to earmark that as a item to be used as a down payment. So that would have to close out the free cash at year end.
Thank you, Mr. Kastanovich.
I notice that our state representative, Mr. Frost, is here. Thank you for coming, Mr. Frost. And now, Mr. Holstrom.
Ken Holstrom, Board of Selectmen. For the past 3 weeks, the board has held hearings soliciting residents' input on whether the town should purchase 50 acres of property on South Hill Road that you have before you tonight. I kept mainly quiet on the opinions during that hearing because I wanted to hear what our options were and give residents a chance have their say without my opinion swaying them one way or another. Tonight, I'd like to respectfully ask the town meeting to support the purchase of this property. I've lived in Auburn my whole life, within half a mile of Town Hall. As a town meeting member back in the 80s, I voted to purchase 120 acres of Packagug land from the Post Cuttings, where Goddard Drive, Packagug Church, and the Pappas Recreation Complex sit today. It was a wise decision then, like the opportunity to purchase this property is a wise choice today. I arrived at this decision for a couple of reasons. Excuse me. First, I'm not in favor of a large housing complex made up of rental units anywhere in Auburn, not just on Packagug Hill. Secondly, and in my opinion, the very generous $1 million donation to keep this land as open space is attractive to me both financially and aesthetically. Therefore, there just aren't many pieces of open space left in Auburn, so I'm fine with it remaining undeveloped. Finally, the cost of the taxpayers of borrowing this $1.865 million, including the $1 million donation, over the next 10 to 20 years is minimal, $22 for the average taxpayer, to preserve this land as open space and maintain the small town feel and the integrity of our community. It's a bargain, and I urge you to support this article with the funding option as recommended by the town administration. Thank you.
No. Yes, I recognize him first.
Jerry Balam, Precinct 4. I just have a question. We talked about $40 per taxpayer if we borrow the 2.8 million. Now it's, if we take that million, so we're only borrowing 1.8 million, then the cost to the taxpayer is $22 for 10 years, correct? That's what we heard?
Mr. Kazanovich, in fact, I think is the 40 not high, Mr. Kazanovich?
Excuse me?
Is the 40 itself not high? Is that a high figure? $40.
It's high.
It's high, that's what I thought.
We presented many funding scenarios, actually, for
What are we voting for right now?
the motion would allow the town to borrow $2.865 million. Now,
Which is not the $22 increase.
let me just get into the details a little bit. First of all, whether the gift is in play or not, we would still need the full authorization of 2.865. Even with the million, if we were to get the million up front, then we would only need an authorization of 1.865. But because the million donation is paid over a 3 to 4 year period, we would need $2.865 million within a 90-day period from when it is voted by the Board of Selectmen. So, the options that we presented are as follows. There is a borrowing that would occur if the gift were not in play. We would have to go out and borrow $2,865,000 within the 90-day period. The debt and interest, at today's interest rates at our current rating, would mean an increase of 16 cents per $1,000 of value on the tax rate. For a house valued at $227,000, roughly, which is the median value of a house as presented by our chief assessor at the FY 2015 tax classification hearing, would mean an increase, a yearly increase of $36.48. So,
Would there be a decrease when you receive the $1 million?
no,
Where would that money go?
at level debt service, that would be about $315,000 a year. It would cost that median household $36.48 for a 10-year period. All things being equal and assuming the value were to stay the same.
I still don't understand, if you're gonna borrow 2.8 million, and the interest on it is the $36 per household median income, then you're gonna get the $1 million over 3 years.
No, that's the second option, which I'm going to get into. First of all, it's not $36.48 of interest. That's actual taxation that is required to pay the $315,000 per year at level debt service. The second option, which takes into consideration the gift, what would happen, and we looked at different scenarios, this makes the most financial sense in terms of total tax savings to the residents of the community. We would go out and borrow on a short-term basis $1 million within the 90-day period. That would give us $1 million to apply towards the purchase of the property. At the same time, we would also go out and permanently bond $1,865,000. We would want to do that because we want to bond this as quickly as possible because we can't borrow money any cheaper than it is today. The rates are at historic lows. We could go out and short-term the full value, convert that into a permanent bond 4 years down the road once we receive the entire million. But the interest rates 4 years down the road could be at 3, 4, 5%. We know we can get a rate at 2 or maybe slightly under 2. It makes sense to do it today. So under that scenario, under short-term borrowing for $1 million, and as the gift comes in, we renew that every year for a lesser value. For instance, if we receive $250,000 each year for 4 years till we receive the $1 million, then in year 1, we would borrow $1 million, pay the interest on that $1 million. A year later, when that becomes due, we renew it for $750,000 because we received $250,000. Until we retire. Over a 4-year period, is $37,500. If we were to borrow the $2,860,000 at a rate of roughly 1.5% up front, we would be paying $177,000 of short-term interest over that same period of time. So between the ban and the bond of $1,865 within the first 90 days, the estimated cost to the average homeowner would be, so flip through a page. $0.10 per $1,000 of value, level debt service at approximately $205,000 per year. The cost to the median house, as identified in FY15 at $227,980, $22.80.
Okay, so the first option is $36, the second option is $22.
$22.80.
Do we get to vote on either two options today, or we get to opt?
You would vote on the motion to authorize the town to go out and borrow $2.865 million.
Which is the $36 increase.
All right, excuse me, sir. And then it's up to the selectmen.
Yes.
So if you pass this motion, if you vote it, I should say, you will now give the selectmen the right to borrow this money, and they will be the ones to determine whether they use option 1 or 2.
And we
Okay.
can't amend it, I'm guessing, to just vote.
Let me put it another way. If the authorization were for the net amount, $1,865,000, and for whatever reason, the donor decided to pull its commitment, would say, I don't want to give the gift anymore, the Board of Selectmen couldn't exercise their option. They were only authorized to borrow $1.865. They need an authorization to borrow the full value.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yes, I'm sorry, sir, yes.
Doug Nelson, Precinct 2. I think that answered a lot of my questions, the financial part, because none of that's actually in the warrant article that I saw. And I guess my first question then is, why is there no financial number in the warrant article, to authorize the selectmen to borrow up to, whatever it is, $2.8 million? Usually it would be a financial component in the article itself, would there not?
excuse me, no. The article is a warning. It's actually what it's called in many states. And this article is written with the help of town council. The article is perfectly appropriated. It warns you, all of you, that you have to do X, Y, or Z. Then the motion gives you the specificity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was looking through the open space and recreation plan. I didn't see this parcel identified in that plan. I have all these other areas that were identified. I know it came up very quickly in the town meeting, and the town boards have to act pretty quickly to see this through, and it's quite an opportunity. I'm glad that, we're actually having this conversation. I've been, helping out. I participated in the master plan committee and some open space and recreation planning committees as well, going back over 10 years, and Auburn's been described as the donut hole in conservation in Massachusetts. So that's a good thing. One thing is the benefit of the entire community. And I think somebody earlier had mentioned if there's any strings attached or any thing, I'm just wondering, I know there's been talks of a dog park. Will people be able to walk dogs, go hunting, and enjoy all other various passive recreation out there on this property in the future? That would be my first question. The other question is whether the town could, at some future point, possibly subdivide out parcels of this to contribute back into the neighborhood, let's say on some of these smaller streets. Would the town be able to recoup some of these costs at a later point? And the final thing is, Mr. Kastanovich mentioned state reductions or cuts in the future, and we just have to be cognizant of that and wonder if now is the time to borrow. But I'm all in support of more conservation land in Auburn. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Jacobson, is your answer.
Thank you. To answer your questions, the first question regarding the restrictions, the anonymous donor has made the donation through the Greater Worcester Community Foundation. So the agreement that the town would be provided would come from the Greater Worcester Community Foundation. The donor has put the restriction on it that if the Board of Selectmen accept the donation, which under Department of Revenue regulations, the Board of Selectmen is the authority that's required to accept any donation. If they accept that donation, then 100% of the parcels, I'm sorry, can you hear me? 100% of the parcels that are purchased under this notification will remain as open space with passive recreation. My understanding is the donor would allow walking trails. We've actually looked at a map, and there is a small, probably 10 to 12-foot section that actually connects the Pappas Recreation Complex land with this land, where a walking trail could go through, so that parking could be utilized at the Pappas Recreation Complex, which already exists, and walking trails could ultimately be developed that connect that beautiful piece of land to this piece of land through that small section that is owned. So trails could be there. As far as walking dogs, absolutely, dogs, I'm assuming, would be allowed. As with any place in town, you'd want be responsible dog owners. As far as a dog park, the donor has indicated that they want the land to remain intact. It's to remain as conservation land. It's to preserve what's there. It's to preserve the beauty, to preserve the natural habitat, to preserve any wildlife that may be there. So any taking down or paving over or any area would not be part of a passive recreation, but walking dogs through there, walking people through, and I will assume, and I will check on this, but we are assuming also potentially snowshoeing or cross-country skiing on the snow that's not going to damage the environment. Regarding the subdivision of parcels and the question regarding that, if the town, if the Board of Selectmen votes to accept the $1 million donation because of the restrictions, 100% of the land would remain as conservation land and open space. Therefore, there'd be no opportunity to sell off any portion of the land for any other use. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there was somebody down front.
Good evening. Paula Rossick, Precinct 3.
Yes, Paula.
I talked to several residents in my precinct, and they agree with Mr. Holstrom. They think we should go for it. Just a comment.
Thank you, Paula. Mr. Stencil?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes,
Ken
Mr.
Stencil, Precinct 4. I move the question.
Okay. All right, All those opposed to moving the question should signify by raising their hands. Seeing no one opposed, we will now vote the article, the motion itself. It's a 2/3 vote because it's a borrowing, and as usual, I'm going to ask who's opposed, and we'll see. Anybody opposed to this motion, please raise your hand. There is opposition to the motion, therefore we will have the counters come up and do their duty.
We will now go with all those who favor this motion, signify by raising your hands. Okay, all those opposed now, please signify by raising your hand. One.
The motion is voted 98-2. You're an excellent town meeting, thank you. Oh, now we need another motion. Mr. Stencil? Oh, dissolve. Dissolve. Second? All in favor? We are dissolved.